Saturday morning, the Experts program continuing here on Power Talk, 1460 and 101 FM. Luis Alvarez, CEO of the Alvarez Technology Group, on the line with us. Good morning, Luis.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Doing pretty good. And yourself?
I am doing terrific. It's going to be a great day on the water today and tomorrow. I'm helping a race called the Sea Otter Classic. It's a bunch of high schoolers, 60 high schools from around California and the Pacific Northwest come down to Monterey and race for 2 days. So it'll be a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Is this the one where they bring the boats that they constructed themselves?
No, they use a class of boat called FJ, which is a fairly small flat bottom boat with a drop down keel that I wouldn't sail one of these things. I'm too big, but two students can fit there comfortably, and they race those back and forth.
Okay, so they bring these down like a trailer?
They do. And so our club has about a dozen of them, and then the CSUMB has another 5 or 6 that they bring out, but then most of the other ones come from the schools themselves. They'll bring them down with them and sail in them.
Very cool. Sounds like it'll be a lot of fun, and it's Saturday and Sunday.
Saturday and Sunday. So if you want to come down, well, there's so much going on in Monterey this weekend, but if you see us out there, a bunch of little boats going back and forth to the beach, that's what's going on.
All right. Are they working off a measured mile or something?
We do, yeah. We have a set course with gates. We'll be setting the marks. That's one of the jobs I'll be doing, is setting big orange balloons on the water that become the mark boats go around. And then mostly out there for their safety, to make sure that if these boats capsize, that they can get back up into them and that none of the kids gets hurt.
And how much speed do they get up into in these boats when they get going?
They can get up to, it'll be pretty light winds this weekend, but we've had a few regattas where the wind was pretty stiff, 12 to 15 knots, and these boats can get up to 6 knots. They go pretty fast.
Okay. And they're really small boats. Yeah, that is kind of fast in a really small boat.
Yeah.
It's all relative, right?
Yeah, it is all relative. I tell you, sometimes when I'm out on the boat and we're doing 8 or 9 knots, it feels like we're speeding at 100 miles an hour.
Right.
But I have to remind myself that I can walk faster than the boat is sailing. So
that's what they say it's like if you're on the deck of a carrier or a battleship moving at like 30 or 33 knots, that it's like a car going 100 miles an hour.
Yep. It's a really interesting sensation. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that in my case, you're in an open cockpit, you're close to the water, you are really exposed to the elements, and it's a whole different experience. And, sitting inside a car with the windows rolled up and barreling down the road at 80 miles an hour.
Well, it sounds like they'll have fun, and I imagine you guys are probably going to treat them to a couple of pretty good meals when it's all done.
Yep, lots of good food and lots of good camaraderie. These kids a lot of them make lifelong friendships coming to these events.
So a barbecue at the yacht club.
You got it.
Hey, the other day we got started talking about MFA, multi-factor authorization. Wanted to get back to that, but before we jump into that, I had one quick thing to ask you about, say, the difference between 4G and 5G. I heard it described this way the other day on one of our shows. Glenn Beck was talking about it, and he said, think of 4G as data flowing through a garden hose, but then think of 5G as that same hose being the size of the channel.
Yeah, that's a very apt description, because the amount of data is exponentially more in 5G. More importantly, the latency is reduced to such an extent that it feels like everything's going faster, because you just don't have that delay that you do with 4G.
So right now, you and I are using the Zoom app on our phones, and there is a little bit of latency, because sometimes when I say something to you, you'll reply like maybe 2 seconds later. It's like watching a reporter on a satellite phone from the Middle East. The question is asked, and then there's this long pause, and then the person answers, and that's the latency in the digital signal. So it's the same thing with this, but once we get 5G, that latency will disappear.
Absolutely. It'll be as seamless as being in the same room.
Boy, that will be revolutionary. All right, on to MFA. Now there's multi-factor authorization and there's two-factor authorization. Are they the same or are they different?
They're the same. The idea behind multi-factor, and it's multi-factor authentication, the idea behind it is that you have more than one way to authenticate, right? So we're used to putting in our user ID and using our password as our authentication method. So that's a single authentication method.
Right.
But having multiple authentication methods means you have something that prompts you beyond just the password. So for example, many of these MFA systems, the ones that, for example, Google uses for consumers and some people use for banking, will text you. So it needs to know your cell phone number so that you'll log in and then it'll text you a code that you then have to enter to get completely into the website.
So pay your phone bill.
Yeah. So pay your phone bill and have it handy. There's been a few times when we've embraced multi-factor authentication at our company as a way to secure ourselves and secure our clients. So almost all of the sites that we use, we're using MFA. And sometimes you forget when you go to log into a site and your phone happens to be in another room, or, you're in the conference room and you have to go back to your office to grab your phone so that you can get the code or enter the secondary information that you need to log in. Mm-hmm. But it's a very secure way, because if somebody steals your password or guesses your password, they would still have to have your cell phone and be able to log into your cell phone, for example, to get that code. So it prevents somebody from just guessing one method of authentication and getting access to everything that you own.
And generally, the MFA code that sent you, that texted code, is 6 digits, and they are going to be a different set of digits every time. And they generally are only good for a very short amount of time. I mean, I'm talking like maybe 2 minutes. They have a shelf life of like 2 minutes. If you don't input that code within 2 minutes, it expires, and then you have to go through the authentication process again.
Exactly. And sometimes, that delay is intentional, because you want to make sure that somebody's not gaming the system somehow. Mm-hmm. And so by limiting it, if somehow they get access to that secondary form of authentication temporarily, they only have a limited amount of time that they can use it before it starts to fail again.
Okay. One of the things I notice here, we use MFA for accessing our VNC, the virtual private network that we have to access functions here at the radio station. So if I'm out doing a live broadcast from somewhere and I need to see this next-gen computer system that we run all of our automation through, I have to put in my authentication and whatever that happens to be. Then I get a text back and I put in those 6 digits, and that will generally give me access to the system. Now, I had something really interesting happen a few weeks ago. We went out to do a remote broadcast at a client's, and for some crazy reason, the hotspot that we have wasn't working, and that's normally what I use to get our connection to the internet. So the only choice I had to use at that point was to borrow the Wi-Fi from the business. Now, they had a free public Wi-Fi, so this is really interesting, Louis. I was able to connect on the Wi-Fi. I put in my MFA, and that worked, but when it got to trying to connect to make the final handshake with the system, it kept kicking me out. It just wouldn't let me in. What we found out was the way our system is structured is that if you're using free public Wi-Fi, the system knows that, and it will not allow the handshake to go all the way through. You have to use a password-protected internet access.
Yep, and that's becoming more and more commonplace, because the idea of entering your credentials in an unsecured Wi-Fi environment is just as bad as giving your password to somebody. So this prevents you from being on an unsecured network and logging into or trying to log into a secure facility or secure site like your office.
So what we ended up doing was, one of the guys that was working with us, his iPhone can be used as a hotspot, his personal iPhone. So we accessed the internet over that. He gave me his password for it, and then we were able to handshake and get in.
And the reason you can is because you can password protect those hotspots.
Right, exactly.
And you have to know the code to be able to get into it. And that satisfies the requirement at the other end on where the VPN host connects you up.
Yeah, and the funny thing was, I began to realize what was going on and why the connection wouldn't complete, even though we had a perfectly strong signal from their Wi-Fi. And so I pleaded with the manager of the business. I said, look, I can't use your public Wi-Fi. I need your password-protected Wi-Fi in order to make this thing complete. And he said, oh, no, we can't let anybody who's not an employee here use that. So I'm sorry. I was like,
good for him.
Yeah, and that's good for you. But, at the same time, buddy, your broadcast almost didn't get on the air. So, we're trying to help you out here, doing this to advertise your business.
Yeah, and it's that's kind of funny, but it was the right thing to do. Yeah. I mean, too many times in the past where we've been very lax with security, we've allowed somebody comes in, a vendor, for example, into your business and says, hey, can you give me the Wi-Fi password? And you're like, oh, sure, go ahead. Well, more and more, we're setting up these Wi-Fi environments so that there's a guest access network that's completely separate. And in our case, for example, if you come to our office, that guest network is also password protected, but it goes straight out to the internet. You don't have any access to any internal sources.
And actually, everybody that has a business, if you have a Wi-Fi, I know it's a lot easier to let your customers have free public Wi-Fi, but you really ought to have some sort of authentication for it, because I'll give you an example. What happened, a friend of mine had a restaurant over in Marina, and he had free public Wi-Fi. And what would happen is, his restaurant's open from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. And he has a particular data cap that he pays for every month month. And we were talking one time, and he was telling me, man, my data usage is just like sky high. It's gone sky high. It's never been this high before. Usually it always averages around a certain amount, even though, he's got all these customers using it. But it went really high, and his bill like almost tripled one month. So I started thinking about it, and I said, hey, I'll bet you, because he's got, glass windows all the way around the restaurant, I'll bet you that people are driving up and parking next to the sidewalk of your restaurant. They're accessing your free public Wi-Fi, and they're sitting there in their vehicles, either on their mobile device or they got their laptop, and they're using your internet for free when you're not there, and they're eating up all your data. And so he came down one night around 8 o'clock. He was in town, and he drove by, and he said there was a guy in a pickup truck out there with the light on inside it, and he was on his computer. He was on his internet.
Yep.
So he went in the restaurant. He went in the restaurant, and he turned the internet off, and the guy drove away.
We had a client that we took on a few years ago that one of the first things we always check is all the security settings in their environment, and discover that, like your restaurateur, they had an internet access point that was set up for open guest Wi-Fi. And so we said, hey, we should apply a password. It's easy to do. Just you can have a little card on the desk here. So when anybody shows up, you can just give them the card and they can enter that password. And I said, yeah, I'll absolutely do it. The next day, a guy comes knocking at the door saying, hey, what happened to the Wi-Fi? I can't get on anymore. And it was some dude that was just parking outside of their office. And he was complaining to them that he needed to have access to their Wi-Fi and wanted to know what happened. So it happens more frequently than we think.
Go to the library.
Yeah, exactly. Free Wi-Fi all day long.
All right. Anything else we should know about this?
No, it is cybersecurity month that October is, and we're going to continue the conversation around cybersecurity and cyber policies. But if anybody out there has any questions and wants to learn, what they can do better to protect themselves, by all means, feel free to give us a call. We're happy to do a free security assessment and give them some insight into what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong and how they can improve their security profile.
Sounds great. Luis Alvarez, CEO of the Alvarez Technology Group, has been our guest. You can reach him at the Alvarez Technology Group. AlvarezTG.com is the web address, at AlvarezTG. That's the Twitter handle, and of course, the ever-present 1-800 number for the I-Team.
Give us a call at 866-78-I-TEAM. That's 866-784-8326.